Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to your Microsoft GP year-end process webinar. We know this is an extremely popular webinar and much anticipated webinar. Obviously, the time of year for a lot of our clients, June 30 being year-end, it is that time to get ready and be ready for your year-end within your Dynamics GP application. My name's Michael and I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by Bernardin, who's going to take us through the presentation today. One thing I just want to highlight though, Bernardin's actually going to show steps through the process of running a year-end, and this very much is an educational style webinar, but we do recognise and appreciate that this is something that hopefully you only have to do once a year. So you're still not alone. If you do need our help, if you do need a consultant to help you with your year end, we're certainly more than happy to help you with that. So if you do want to get some help from us, just reach out to your account manager and we can help you actually run that year end with you. So just before we actually get started with the presentation today, just a couple of things I would like to mention. We will leave some time right at the end of the presentation to handle and answer some questions for you. On the right-hand side of your screen in your GoToWebinar panel, there is a questions tab. You can just type your questions in there at any time, and then, as I said, we've left some time at the end of the presentation to actually answer those for you. And secondly, we're recording this session, and we will send you a link to that recording so you can rewatch. As I mentioned, this is an educational style webinar, so certainly one that is worth going back and looking at and just going through those steps again. So we'll share the whole recording, not just the slide content. We'll actually send the whole recording to you. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Bernardin. Bernardin is one of our senior GP consultants here at Professional Advantage and has been working with the GP technology for a number of years, and certainly experienced in not only helping organisations and clients with the overall GP application, but definitely helping clients get through and navigate through that year-end process in the best possible way. So Bernardin, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that interesting introduction, I'd say. So with that in mind, we're actually going to be delving directly into the Dynamics GP 2018 year-end procedures. You'll see we've provided a link here that will take you directly to our website, and I'm just going to quickly dive out of here quickly to show you it. So if you go here, it will take you to this web page over here, which is under Dynamics GP year-end procedure. And if you scroll down a bit further on the page, what you will see is got a whole group of information above there, and we're going a bit further. You'll actually see a little click on link that will take you to the year-end procedures. Now, if I take you through there, it's just giving you a really high-end level of how to go about creating a new financial year. So from there, you can see that we've got step 1, where we create the financial period, step 2, begin date, step 3, change of the period name, and then 4 would be clicking OK, and then 5 would be finally creating your tax periods within the financial period. If you also scroll a bit further down the page, you're also going to discover that we've also included the procedure lists for other versions for Dynamics GP. The reason for this is each version could be slightly different from the previous version, so you might need to refer to these to understand whether what we explained today has any impact on your procedures. At the end of the list, we've also created an FAQ. Now, the FAQs are general questions that have come through to support desk over the years, and just refer to them. 90% of all your inquiries regarding your year-end procedures can be found in that window. I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that in Dynamics GP 2013 R2, it was actually the first version of GP that allowed for a reversal in the financial year, which was quite a dramatic step for Microsoft, because before that, if you're required to back out a financial year due to unforeseen circumstances, it required somebody, for example, from PA to come into your organization and do it from the back end, which, as we all know, is not always the most audit-friendly thing to do. So that for us was a dramatic shift. We also advise you, other important facts would be always make a backup before commencing any of the year-end processes. We're talking about the financial module, the sub-ledgers. Please make a backup before you begin this entire process. The other thing that is also highly recommended is that you should log out or make sure users have logged out of the system before beginning the year-end process. However, there is an exception to this. If you've got 10 entities and only one is currently being utilized the year-end function, the users can currently log into the other entities and from there continue working until it is a time for that year-end rollover for them. The tool that we do use to make sure that people don't by accident go into that entity is something called Take the Company Offline. So we can make sure during that process, the users aren't affecting the GP database for any reason. The other thing that you should also be aware of is that you do not need to wait for the auditors to do your year-end rollover. 2 points of that being is you require an opening balance for your GL. So if you don't roll over, you won't have that. The other reason is you may only receive those figures later on in the year. So please, whatever you want it, the year-end can be accommodated during any time of the year. What actually happens when GP does a financial year-end process? So when we do a year-end process in the general ledger, it transfers the current year's general ledger transactions to history, firstly. Then it transfers current P&L amounts to the retained earnings. It zeroes all the P&L account balances. It summarizes the balance sheet accounts, brings in beginning balance in the new year, removes inactive accounts with zero balances, which of course is optional because not everybody requires that functionality. And the last thing is it prints the year-end report. Now the year-end report can contain the general ledger accounts only. It can also include the analytical accounting, and it can also include multi-currency. As on the previous slide, we spoke about the general ledger year-end. However, there are other modules that experience a year-end as well. We'll touch on those a bit later on during the webinar. The year-end is important to remember that the standard month-end processes should continue as they always have. In that regard, you need to make sure that all your batches are posted throughout the Dynamics GP system. Now, I've given you a path here. So you would go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools, Routines, and Master Posting. Inside there, you'll be able to validate any of the outstanding batches that need to be posted for the current period. The next step that we generally do is run our typical month-end procedures. So what I've done here is, if you'll bear with me, this is similar to a dashboard that we've created in the past, outlining exactly the procedures that need to be closed for month-end. So as you can see here, we specify backing up databases, closing the purchase order processing module, closing the sales order processing, closing the inventory module, closing the receivables, and closing the general ledger. All steps, this should be a general health check in your organization that should occur every single month. The next step that we need to do is to make sure that we have created the new financial year and the tax year inside the system. And then, before we can do anything else, it's always recommended that you make a backup with inside the system. When we talk about the databases, it's very important for you to understand that it's not just your GP databases. You must also remember your Dynamics databases. So if you have 5 databases and one of them are Dynamics, please back them all up, except of course, actually you probably don't want to back up your test company, but please go ahead and back up all databases with inside GP. Some of the items I have mentioned here, particularly on the technical side, may be out of your comfort zone, and it might entail you reaching out to maybe somebody in your IT department to assist you with perhaps all the backups. There are many scenarios that may occur within Microsoft Dynamics GP where the numbers just don't necessarily add up, or the detailed transactions that leave from one value may not equate to the summary amount showing on another. The Reconcile feature can make sure that your summary information is accurate. This is not a function that you'll have to run on a regular basis, but it should be done before completing your year end. Known issues for inconsistencies could be power failures, hardware issues, and software incompatibilities. The Reconcile Utilities basically fixes data. If you run the GL ledger Reconcile, it will retotal the account summary records based on the detailed information. If you ran the inventory reconciler, it will correct numbers such as quantity allocated and quantity available on all items within the stock sheet. We have to then have a quick look at the GP reconciler, the sales side. So I'm just going to use the home page, and I'm going to go to Utilities under Sales, and we'll come through to the Receivables Reconcile Amounts window. We've got on here, we can reconcile the current debtor amounts, outstanding debtor amounts, batch info, financial year or calendar year, and you can also reconcile this report or just simply print it. There's a reconcile date. So every single reconcile subledger has its own functionality there within. So mentioning that, we've also then got the sales order processing, which has remove sales documents attached to it. There's the purchase order document reconciler. There's the inventory control reconciler. And then, of course, Dynamics GP Project Accounting has 4 reconcilers inside it. It's the PA reconciler, it's the PA recreate periodic, the PA reconcile periodic, and the PA reconcile inventory. Sorry, PA actually stands for Project Accounting, in case I get a bit too technical there. And then lastly, we've got the reconcile management tool, the payables management tool, and the general ledger tool and that can actually be done by year or by period per year. Occasionally, data corruption can occur in tables due to power failures, printer failures, network failures. Actually, there's quite a few, but I won't go into too much detail on that. But the most common indicator of data corruption is an alert message that indicates that an error has occurred in a specific table. However, data corruption may not always be that obvious. It may be more difficult to identify in which table or tables it's occurred in. The other indicators might be inaccurate data in a window or on a report, unusual characters in a window or once again in a report, and then a window just can simply not be opened. When the data corruption is suspected, running checklinks is a method to resolve this issue. Some of the information in the tables or groups is stored in 2 or more tables that compromise that group. If the information in one table is missing or damaged, checklinks program examines the related tables where the same information is stored and recreates the damaged record in the first table. To run checklinks, it's just a matter of going to the checklinks window and selecting whichever series you're going to run. Please keep in mind that you should run those checklinks that are relevant to your business. For example, if you're only using the financial module within Dynamics GP, there's no reason to run other links except for the financial series. Also be mindful of the amount of data to be vetted during the process. It's not unheard of for some clients to be able to access their systems days after activating the checklinks procedure. General practice is for most clients to make a backup, then to start the process on a Friday evening, and hopefully by the Monday morning when they walk in, the process has been completed. Once the checklink process has been concluded, if any changes were made to the tables, you will receive a report identifying those changes that were made. The question I've received in the past was, can we accept or decline the changes made during checklinks? The answer would be no. The changes are automatically made to the database. If you happen to disagree with the changes, then a backup will have to be restored. To access the checklinks window, it's quite a simple process of going to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Maintenance, and Checklinks. On the window, we can see the series. So you would determine whether it's the financial series you wanted to run, sales, purchasing, inventory, payroll, project, system, or company. If you were selecting a whole group of series, what you would do is select the series. And if it's a matter of running all logical tables, all checklinks, just select all. And what the system will do, it will highlight them all and pull them into the selected area. You can run multiple series together, which does save you a bit of time, particularly if you're running the process over the weekend. So by clicking sales, I once again click on all, and it'll populate them all in there. After which I can just click on OK, and the system will run the checklink process for us. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is the year-end routine on the subledgers. Basically, the full discussion so far has been about the general ledger routine or year-end routine. Now we're going to first focus on the subledgers because they themselves do have a year-end process that you can follow. Each of them can be found in the following places. So if you go to GP Tools Routines series, so that would be payables, inventory, receivables, or the fixed asset module, and then year-end close, you would get that subroutine. Before beginning any of the year-end process, it is advisable to make a backup first. Close the financial periods for that subledger, and by doing that, you'll do it in the financial module. Always remember, though, the subledgers should be always run in a particular order, that order being the inventory control, the receivables management, payables management, and fixed assets. The reason for that is each module affects the balancing of the following series. So for example, if you make any quantity changes at an inventory level, which is affecting any goods received, which is your payables management, therefore that will have a knock-on effect to that series. So run them in that particular order. The other thing is the sub-ledgers could be run a few months prior to the financial year end. They do not have to be run concurrently. They can be run before you have your final audited figures for your general ledger. However, the most important one to note here is the fixed asset module. It should be concluded as soon as possible into the new financial year. Without having a rollover, you will not be able to continue depreciating in the fixed asset module until that point. The first subledger that we're going to be looking at the moment will be the inventory control. To perform an inventory year end, we'll need to make sure that all transactions in that module have been successfully posted. Also, make sure that all the invoicing transactions, sales order processing transactions, inventory transactions for the current financial year has been entered and then posted before you even think about closing the module. We'll then advise you to reconcile the inventory quantities, reconcile the quantities for all items by using the Reconcile Inventory Quantity window to make sure that the inventory control data has not been damaged during the year. And if it has, the system will automatically make corrections to the subtotals if required. You can also then do a physical inventory count. This, of course, is optional. It's not a requirement, but you can do a physical inventory account and then naturally post those adjustments. After which, the following step will be to print any additional reports that you may need for permanent record keeping. And we normally suggest that you print the stock status report, the purchase receipt reports, turnover reports, perhaps the transaction history reports, serial number listing, and lot number listing. After all the reports have been printed, you can then do a backup and then finally close off the year. To close off the year, if we go back to Dynamics GP, there's my inventory and my year end under routines, and we have our inventory year end. And once you've closed them off, I'm actually going to leave this window because I'd like to come back to some of these options here because they're quite important for future reference. I will then, once the routine has been completed, I will then close off my fiscal periods for that year in the inventory module and make another backup. I'd just like to return to the inventory year-end close window. There's a couple of windows here that we just need to discuss so you're aware of what actions occur inside GP when you select them. So the first thing I'd like to point out is the discontinued items. If you happen to tick this box, the system will discontinue items that have been marked for discontinued will be zeroed. All items that have been marked as discontinued items and have a zero balance will be removed from the inventory tables during the year-end process. Those discontinued items that have a quantity on hand of zero, except for those that have kick quantities and have no unposted transactions, will be completely removed from the inventory module. If you select the sold receipts and cost change history prior, it will remove all sold purchase receipts and historical cost changes for that item using average perpetual, last in, first out, perpetual, or first in, first out for periodic valuation method, and then you'll have to enter a date. The sold receipts, quantity, sold details, historical cost changes with dates that come before that date will be removed. If you select sold lot attributes, values for those lots will be removed from the system as well. And then finally, if you select the box that says item standard cost, the standard cost for any items that have been assigned the FIFO periodic valuation method or the LIFO periodic valuation method will be adjusted automatically to reflect each item's current cost or the amount most recently paid for that item. Another thing you should also just note is that when you select to update the item's cost, standard cost during inventory year-end close process for the standard cost of the items, you must have a standard cost revaluation account populated in one of the processes for this to be completed. If you don't, you will get an exception report as soon as this occurs. So as mentioned, what happens when we run the inventory reconciler? We've covered a bit of it already, but also when the inventory reconciler year-end occurs, the following two tasks happen within the system. It transfers all the summarized current year quantity, costs, and sales amounts to transaction history for the items for which you have been keeping summarized sales history. It updates the amount in the item's begin quantity field to the quantity on hand field on each site. Certain reports, such as the turnover report, use the amount in the beginning quantity field for report calculations. It zeroes the quantity sold field in the item quantities maintenance windows for each site. It removes purchase order receipts and cost change history for that items that have been completely sold. It removes any discontinued items from the item records that have been completely sold, and it removes any lot attributes from the records of lot numbers that have been completely sold. You'll also note that we also state that there is no year-end inventory report. As stock is current, there will never be a year-end. If you require a report, please run your stock status report for that information. The receivables year-end summarized steps would be, we would post all sales and receivables transactions for the year, and please make sure that it's posted before the year-end close occurs. There are some areas in GP that aren't date sensitive, but in others they are, and that's why you should close the year. If you do not close the year after you've entered all current year transactions and before you enter transactions for the next year, these areas could contain the incorrect information. The next step is make a pre-year end closing backup. This backup should be kept safe and in a permanent storage area for any references that may occur in the future. We would then close off the receivables year end under routines, and then naturally we'll go ahead and close the fiscal periods and close the tax year. And then final step for the receivables year end is to make a post-year end closing backup. As with the pre-year end closing backup, please make sure that this backup is kept in a permanent storage facility, as if any permanent information is required thereafter, historical information that can be ascertained from those backups. What happens when the RM or receivables management year end occurs? The first thing that happens is the calendar year end processes in Microsoft GP clears for a number of fields. For example, the finance charges, total rates, total finance charges, total waive, there's a number of them in the customer summary window. As for the fiscal year in details, they also change, and the things that they would change would be average days to pay, high balances year to date, total bad debts, total returns, total sales. They would be automatically updated. As mentioned before, the receivables management is date sensitive, and the following items are updated based on the smart list objects, the receivable management summary report, and the amount since last close view in the customer summary window. If you are one of those people that work better with a checklist, there is a year-end closing checklist in GP for both the fiscal and the calendar year end. So if you ever require it, you can easily access that information yourself. The payables year end. The payables year end also has basically the same steps as that you would follow in the receivables year end. We would make sure that all the transactions for the current financial year has been posted before we close the year. If you want to enter future period transactions before closing the year, create a new batch for the future period transactions, save the future period transactions in a new batch, but do not post the new batch until after the new year has been closed. We also advise you to print the age trial balance with options report in a detailed format and to keep that in your year-end permanent financial records. After which, perhaps print the vendor period analysis report and keep that also with your permanent financial records. We then make a pre-year end closing backup, which we store once again in a safe area, permanent storage. Then close the year end, close the fiscal periods, close the tax year, and then make a year-end closing backup. One of the questions I have had in the past was, are inactive vendor records cleared during year-end closing? If not, how can inactive records be removed? The short answer would be no. Inactive vendor records are not automatically removed. To remove an inactive vendor record, the following conditions must be met. The vendor should not have any documents in work or in history. If you'd like to delete all inactive vendor records that fit that criteria you're searching for, you would need to go to the mass vendor delete routine and specify a range that you were going to delete and then remove those vendors from the system. When I run the payables year end, what happens? There's a financial year details that get cleared, and those are your amount billed, your finance charges, returns, any write-offs you might have for the year to date are updated on the amount since close view under the vendor yearly summary window. Although the payables management module is date sensitive, the Smart Objects payable management summary reports and the amount since last close view on the vendor yearly summary window are updated based on the closing of the payables management module. The fixed asset year end has also got a bit more in detailed steps that you need to follow. The first being we need to first make sure that we perform a year-end closing for the payables management system. As mentioned earlier, certain modules rely on other information from other modules for them to be updated. By closing the payables management first, you can guarantee that the outstanding fixed asset transactions have been capitalized correctly. We then enter all fixed asset transactions for the current financial year, which could include all additions, changes, transfers, or retirements for that fiscal year. One thing to note though, transfers and undue retirement transactions should never be performed in a historical year. It should always be in the current financial year. We'll then depreciate all assets to the last day of the current financial year. It's important to depreciate all assets through to the last day of the current financial year. If all assets are not depreciated through to the last day of the current financial year, prior to processing the year end, depreciation amounts will be incorrect. We'll then perform the GL posting process. As you all know, that takes the balances from the fixed asset module through to the general ledger. We'll then run our year-end reports that you will want to keep as part of your year-end financial records. So the year-end to date depreciation amounts for the previous financial year are not kept in the fixed asset management. Therefore, you must print any reports that contain information before you close the year. I recommend that you print the annual activity, additions, retirements, transfers, depreciation ledger, fixed assets to general ledger reconciliation. If you have more than one book, the following report should also be printed: book-to-book reconciliation and book-to-book year-to-date depreciation comparison. After you run your reports, the next thing that we need to do is make sure that the calendar has been rebuilt correctly, make another backup or your pre-year closing backup, and then perform your year-end closing routine. Run this process per fixed asset book so that all books have been successfully closed off. You will be prompted during the process to confirm that you have in fact depreciated all assets through to the last day of the financial year. If not, the system will not allow you to continue. A fixed asset year-end report is an optional to print. This report will provide a list of all assets affected by the year-end close process, by book, and status of those assets. After you've concluded this step and you proceed to the book setup window, you will notice the current fiscal year field would have increased by 1. So for the current financial period, it will be 2018. The new one should automatically reflect 2019 now. And the final step will be the post-year-end close backup. A previously asked question regarding fixed assets was from a client that wanted to know if they closed off their general ledger and then only realized that they hadn't closed off the fixed asset management yet, could they still perform a year-end on that module? It's always recommended that you should always close the general ledger off last. However, you can, in the case of fixed asset, close it off after the general ledger. Only follow this step if the general ledger is integrated with the other modules. If your general ledger is not integrated with other modules, you can skip doing your financial year end. If you're using analytical counting, you will need to make sure that the dimensions have been properly marked for consolidation during the year-end process. You will then have to make sure that you have made the final adjustment entries in the GL, and they are to correct any inconsistencies within the ERP system. We'll then ask you to print a list to verify the posting types of each account. The posting type determines whether an account is close to retained earnings or whether an account brings a balance forward to the next financial year. If the account balance will be brought forward at the end of the year, the posting type must be set to balance sheet. If the account balance will be close to retained earnings at the end of the year, the posting type should be set to P&L. We'll then close off the last period of the fiscal year, which of course is optional because you will be closing it down further at the end of the process. We will then could rerun the financial reconciler if you so wish. You can then verify the settings in the general ledger setup window. So I'm just going to go to that window because it's quite an important window to just have a look at. There's 4 tick boxes here, and the most important one that we're going to focus on right now is the post to history. If this checkbox is not ticked and you decide to post to history, a prior financial year that's been closed off, the system will not create the double-sided entry journal that you would expect. We'll only print the current financial year journal, not for the prior financial year. So please make sure that it is ticked if that's a requirement. We'll then make a backup of Dynamics GP, pre-backup. We will also then print a detailed trial balance for the current financial year, as well as any other year-end financial statements that you require. Those are generally your balance sheet, your P&L statements, statement of cash flows, statement of retained earnings, and so forth. I will then advise you to close off your financial year. And inside the year-end closing window, we'd see our retained earnings account that we'll be posting to. If you have divisional retained earning account, we will discuss that in about 2 slides time. We will then see we've got the starting journal, which is basically our next journal that the system will utilize. And then we have remove unused segment numbers and maintain inactive accounts. At the bottom here, we have the reverse historical year. So for example, if you have closed the year and you need to reopen that financial year, come through to the reverse historical year and it will back it out. One thing to be aware of, you have got the journal number that the system will automatically take for the posting, but if you reverse it, that journal number will disappear. We've got our close year. If you click on that, naturally that's how we would do our year end. And then final step is we will make a backup. Now the question a lot of people will ask is, how do we quickly identify what our posting type, if they've been set up correctly or not? What I've done is in SmartList, I've used the financials, accounts, and I've created a view here, whereby in ranges, I presume that my balance sheet items would run from 110 right through to 13. And my posting type should all be balance sheet. But as you can see here, I have one that is reflecting as a P&L. What I can do is just quickly go to search. If I really wanted to make the system do all the hard work, we go to posting type and say where it equals P&L. I say OK, and the only one that it should return should be that one. I did mention divisional retained earnings, which in some organizations it would be important to be aware of. So if you go to Setup General Ledger, you'll see that we've got closed to divisional account segments. If I had to select that, I would indicate the account segment, which would specify my account division, and my retained earnings will split it accordingly. All right, so there is my SmartList tip on how you would go about finding the incorrect posting type. We also mentioned maintain history in our other window. And please note, as noted here, if you do not select it, the system will automatically delete the historical information. We've gone through the year-end process, and I have made special note here of the fact, please ensure that the retained earnings account is correct while you're running the process. Ensure that the year that you've been closed is correct, and make sure that you select the close year option to start the process. There isn't an OK button, it's a button that just says close. So what happens in the GL when you run a year end? When closing is complete, the year-end closing report will be printed. This report lists accounts that have been closed and the transactions created to close them. This report is part of an audit trail and should be saved with the company's permanent records. This report should be printed from both the printer and the file, and reprint the profit and loss and balance sheet reports to ensure the expected results. My advice is print a TB before you run the year end, and then after you run the year end as well, run another one, and you can do a comparative between the two of them. I'm just going to quickly touch on the analytical year end. Not many people use the product, but it does. There's a number of people, so I just thought I'd bring it up. The analytical accounting year end can be performed separately from the general ledger year end, but my experience has been it's a lot easier to do it when you run the year end process. If you're running it separately, please make sure you log on as SA user before you run the GL year end routine. This will eliminate permission areas within analytical accounting. You'll also be able to consolidate the analytical dimension data, which creates the balance brought forward entries. And as with anything, if you've got any questions with the analytical year-end process, please contact the help desk or request a PA consultant to assist you with this. Right. On the AA options, there is options when you run the year-end through the AA module. You can transfer transaction detail to history, consolidate transactions and transfer detail to history, and you can print the transfer preview report only. So there's a couple of things inside there. And Michael, I think we're at the questions level.
We sure are, Bernardin, and thank you. The first thing I'd like to say is, wow, there was a lot of content covered in that particular session there. So thank you for sharing that with us. As a reminder, just as we're wrapping up here, on the right-hand side of your screen, and you go to your webinar panel, you can type in questions, and we'll just get to a couple of those now. I am conscious of time, and I do want to make sure we wrap up on time. So if we don't get the opportunity to get to everyone's questions, we will answer those individually and send a response to you. So if you do have a question, please make sure you put that question in. So Bernardin, I see some questions have already started to come through. So just a quick one here, we'll grab that. With receivables management, do I have to run the year-end routine before I start entering receivables transactions in the new financial year?
No. As long as that financial year is open, you can post transactions through it. Just once again, make sure that the period hasn't been closed. So the year needs to be open and the period itself needs to be open for you to transact in. Okay, so no need to stop the processing there. Another question, this one's around payables. Can the payables year-end closing report be reprinted after the year-end close has been completed? I feel like such a negative person today, but the answer would be no.
Sounds like it might be a no.
It's a no. It's just that report can only be printed when you run the routine itself for year-end. It cannot be accessed thereafter again. Mm-hmm. So that's why we do advise you both print it and to file. Okay, excellent. Thank you. And look, just a couple of other questions here. I am conscious of time, so yes, we will make the recording available. We'll send out a link as a follow-up, and inside the recording, of course, is the slides that were presented today. We'll just do one last question. We currently have financial year 19 open. Will this affect our financial year 18 year-end process? The answer would be no. You can have unlimited number of years open inside the system and work in those. So for example, if you've got any prepayments for future years and you need to capture them, you can open up those years and post them inside the system. Okay, excellent. With the inventory module, if it's not closed and is closed after 30 June, will the sold quantities, will the quantities be right or will they not be right? The inventory, they will be right. Remember, it's just the opening, the balances for the various on-hand, sold and so forth that will be updated. So the quantities themselves will always be correct, unless, of course, there's a data issue. Okay, excellent. All right, look, I am conscious of time. As I said, we've got a couple more questions come through. We will answer those separately. If I could just finish off with the slide. There is one thing that I do want to note for everyone. We have a new or relatively new offering called our Temp Plus offering, and we're offering temp staff to our GP clients. We're focusing on the accounts payable process. So the concept here is it's a remote application-ready temp staff member, and we're only offering this to our GP clients. Initially starting with an accounts payable clerk. It's a remote resource, so based in Manila, so remote access is required, but they are trained and experienced in Dynamics GP, so they are genuinely application ready and an experienced resource. It is, of course, only available to clients that are current on their Support Plus. Why are we doing this? So
Now, certainly now is a busy time of year for everyone. So we do know that clients use Temp Services, and we're looking to provide those GP-ready Temp Services. So filling gaps around, if you're looking to hire people and you've got a temporary scenario, if you want to do a bit of load balancing there, or even right now, where year-end is a busy period and you're looking to get a temp in. It, of course, may lead to a longer-term offshore staffing engagement, and we can help with that as well. So just quickly on the cost, so how much does it cost? So we have a daily rate there for less than 10 days, and it's $400 a day. Or if you're looking to book more than 10 days, then there's a reduced rate there of $330 a day. And we provide the facilities. So we provide, of course, the resource, the desk, the PC, the phone, so the connectivity in that regard. All you need is the remote access to your application. So it is a service. I just wanted to highlight that, particularly around year-end. It is a busy period for a lot of people. We certainly know that and acknowledge that. So this is a temp resource that we are offering to our clients. So just to quickly wrap up, Bernardin's covered a lot of things today in that year-end process, but I did mention right at the beginning, if you do need help with that service, to help run that year-end, reach out to your inside account manager or client success manager. If you'd also like to talk to us about that temp service, you can also talk to your account manager or even contact me directly with my contact details there. So on that note, I'd like to say thank you firstly to Bernardin for taking us through that presentation, and then secondly for everyone for attending today. Hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and we will send you a link to that recording. Bye everyone.